On to the superintendent's report on schools reopening. It's all yours, Mucerino.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Let me go ahead and get the presentation up, first of all. And let me preface it that this presentation will be available on our website and will also be sent out in my weekly message. So those who are unable to stay for the entire presentation today or have additional questions or concerns will be able to see this again. Once may not be enough, lots of stuff. And I will send it out in my weekly message. So let's go ahead and begin. I'm calling this Reopening Alvord Schools Continuity of Learning because that's really what is most critical here. All we're hearing about is reopening. And of course, that is what we're doing. But the truth is we really are focused on the continuation of our children's education, and not only academic education, obviously. We want our kids with us. And we are going to work towards making that happen. And we're going to work closely with all of the many people that are working with us on this project. And I'm going to talk about that during this presentation. Plan and principles. So what is undergirding this work are these 5 primary principles. First of all, it has to be adaptable. We have to be prepared in the event that there is rolling closures or something, God forbid, happens again, like in March, and we have to move to a more restricted model. So it has to be adaptable. Number 2, responsive to conditions that are changing. So part of being adaptable, of course, is to be able to respond moment's notice. Informed by public health guidelines. So between the CDC and others, particularly locally, our Riverside County Health Department, who have been wonderful throughout this process, working closely with us. We will continue to monitor them very closely, also through the County Department of Education, which has a dedicated division specifically addressing public health. Informed by stakeholders, and I'm going to talk about our task force. I'm going to talk a little bit about all the messaging and all the input that we are getting. Clearly, we want to respond to the needs of our community. And you can't do that if you don't know what the community wants. So we are continuing to reach out. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then this critical piece in equity are products of design. So in other words, you get what you design for. So as we design these programs moving forward, we're looking to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the variety of children that we serve. And it's a great variety that we serve, that we're happy to serve in Alvord. The framework: equity, access, coherence. So the shared depth of understanding about the nature of this work is critical to any decision that the Board of Education will make. You are trusting the team led by me and the cabinet and all of our facilitators on our task force to provide you with information that you could trust to make this decision moving forward about how reopening looks come August 10th. Continuous improvement and monitoring and communicating. So once again, we do not expect this to be a static thing. We have to have contingencies. We have to continue to monitor on a regular basis, obviously, to ensure that if we do have to make changes, that we are prepared to do so. And then the reopening continuity of learning goals, which are rooted, again, in the practical, not just the philosophical elements of equity. So we talk a lot about equity, of course, it's out there, but what does it look like? What are the practical implications of equity? And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight as well. And I'm toggling back and forth because in Google Meets, I can't control this within this. I have to go back to that page and come back. So I apologize for the delay. Okay, our timeline. We started this in May when we put our task force together. And then we assembled focus groups, and I'll show you those in a minute. On the 19th, the County Department of Education released their guide to reopening schools. We did have a contingent of Alvord people from all stakeholder groups on that committee. We had both our association presidents, we had members of the district team, we had students and a parent representative as well. Between June 20th and the 29th, our focus groups are meeting. And when we meet again for my next report, we will have more feedback from the focus groups. Most have had at least one meeting, some two. And then I will continue to provide community updates, both in this space as well as in my weekly messaging, and of course, utilizing all the social media platforms. We'll have a board study session on the 9th, and that will be when we expect to have the task force recommendations for discussion. And then between the 10th and 15th, the Board of Education will determine at that point if another meeting, another study session is warranted, and if it chooses to discuss it further. We do have a scheduled meeting on the 16th, which could be as soon as that point that a decision is made. But once again, being intentional, being deliberate is our goal, while at the same time we realize our families are anxious. Everyone's anxious. Our teachers, our staff, everyone's anxious to get this going. But we certainly want to continue to be intentional. The task force, we have the following groups that you could see. I won't read that, but again, everyone could see hopefully on the screen. And we are covering all of the major areas. This is a model that the county utilized, so we mimicked it, knowing that we had a bunch of our team members on that county, so they had a good working model in place. So I'd like to thank the facilitators who are doing a wonderful job taking the lead and working with their particular groups. Okay, so looking at what we're trying to accomplish, we have these four primary elements. Providing social emotional support, knowing that many of our families are having very traumatic experiences, from everything from unemployment to all the health scares and potential disease in their own families. Movement, people perhaps having to move, everything that's very traumatic, particularly for children. So that is undergirding our work. Stakeholder voices, as I mentioned earlier, ensuring that we are hearing from our families. We have currently a parent survey, and we're closing in on 30% of our families participating in that. We currently have a student survey out that went out yesterday, so we're looking forward to that feedback real soon. Should have that for the next meeting. And then both of our employee groups are also surveyed. Academic integrity. How do we ensure that our academic programs, knowing that we're limited and restricted by COVID, are still going to provide what our children need and deserve? You come to expect a great education in Alvord, and we expect to give that to you. We just have to work exactly on all the protocols, and everything needs to be in place so that we could safely do that, which is, of course, our last element, safety first. So now breaking it down by section under the health and safety umbrella related to facilities, intensifying our sanitizing, our disinfecting, and our routine cleaning. And that, of course, is a matter of following guidelines and recommendations. Increase in disinfectant frequently touched surfaces, particularly objects, shared objects. We've talked a lot about changing behaviors, knowing that our students, all their lives, we've told them to share. Now we're telling them not to share, right? So you got a lot of things, a lot of behaviors that we take for granted. We just do. We don't even think about them. Will need to change. Ensuring that our heating and air conditioning systems are well maintained and operating effectively and efficiently. Provide or install protective shields when social distancing is not achievable. Again, we know that space, social distancing, and protection, be it face coverings or shields, are the most effective ways to keep the spread of disease. So clearly we want to be able to be in a position where we're able to facilitate that happening. And then install COVID-19 safety signage. So a lot of signage all over the campus, just directing children, directing adults to make sure that everyone is doing their share. This is a collective thing. Everyone recognizes that. We're in this together, and we have to work together to make this work. To continue with health and safety, the signage that was repeated, we covered that one. Provide and install hand sanitizer in every classroom, conference room, library, computer lab, and main administration office. Obviously, where there's likely to be more people, we'll have more services. Work with site administrators to identify at least one isolation room and restroom to isolate students and staff that have symptoms. And then preparing a plan for cleaning and disinfecting in the event of a confirmed or suspected case at the facility. So again, these are all undergirding the work that we're doing as it relates specifically to the facilities. Related to students, staff, and our visitors, people visiting campus, teach and reinforce hand washing, avoiding contact. So things that we all know about, but with children specifically, obviously we have to reinforce that and be very, very active, very, very proactive in helping our children, those some of whom may not be in that habit. So again, it's a matter of changing habits. Obviously, some people touch their face more. It's just, right, it's just kind of who they are, right? I mean, we do, and you're not even thinking about it. So how do we begin to help retrain our children? Just a quick story on that. I remember when my son, and hopefully he's not listening, but when he was in kindergarten, you know, he had a habit of putting his fingers in his mouth when he got comfortable and relaxed. Then the teacher had a little code with him. So she'd remind him because she didn't want to be sucking on his fingers in class. So she had a little way of getting a message to him. It's going to be a lot of things like that, which is why some of the discussions around looping or keeping students with their teachers from last year is being had in a variety of places, because they have relationships with the kids. They know the kids well, and they may have a better chance of being able to help children when it comes to some of those habits that they know they need to change. Implementing distancing inside and outside the classroom to the greatest extent possible. Obviously, that depends on what model, how many kids are in the room. Check daily for signs and symptoms, excuse me. So taking temperatures, what does that look like? Provide training for families for best practice and intensify those communications, knowing once again that we need to continue to message our families, and we need everyone on board, everyone pulling their weight to make sure that we're able to continue to keep our schools open and thriving and everyone healthy. Engage staff in professional development to learn how to identify symptoms and concerns and refer students to services. Elementary teachers already got this down, but some of us secondary folks may need a little more work with that. But nonetheless, we'll continue to help prepare our staff because we want them comfortable, obviously. We don't want anybody worried or nervous or anxious. That doesn't lend itself to teaching or working with kids. So we need everyone comfortable. Work closely with the Riverside County and state authorities to continue to monitor disease levels. So once again, I showed a timeline earlier, but you know, the truth is that we're on the COVID timeline. I think we all recognize that. Continuing on, students, staff, and visitors utilizing a universal screener for early identification. That's everything from health to social emotional needs, academic needs, you name it. But having a universal screen, MTSS model, to ensure that we identify children as soon as we can, which is immediate, to start providing those services. Our staff did such a wonderful job. Our counselors communicated with our families over the last few months, so I'm confident we're going to be able to transition seamlessly when it comes to that as well. Increase communication related to stigmatizing behaviors. All right, some kids may not think it's cool to wear a mask. Of course, we're going to ask families to wear a mask likely, but that remains to be seen what the law is at that point and what best practices are at that point, because it's obviously still 5 or 6 weeks down the road. But nonetheless, what about stigmatizing behaviors? What about kids being bullied perhaps, or in an uncomfortable position, or if a child tests positive for COVID? So how are we going to communicate all these things to our families and our children as well? Again, when I say everyone involved holding their own weight, that means our kiddos as well. One of the things we've learned from schools and countries that have reopened, this stuff's possible even with little kids, like littles, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, right? Just training. It's just a matter of repetition and continuing to support it. So we're confident with our team here, our staffs at our schools, that we're going to be able to really help our children do what they need to do to help all of us. Expand, provide, and communicate mental health and wellness services and resources. I'm going to talk a little bit about it later on in this presentation, but it's kind of the hive effect, right? It's that beehive thing. All of our service, a lot of people are committed to this work, and we all need to work together to make it work. And then limit sharing, as I talked earlier. So, the idea that everyone shares computers, you got the cart next class, well, you got to rethink that. We have a policy, 5141. That looks a little blurry to me, but I'm an old guy, even though my eyes are still pretty good. But I think it's a little blurry. But on the presentation that'll be available to the community, it's clear. We do have an infectious disease policy, so we're going to follow that policy, and that's the same policy. COVID is just one more infectious disease, so we've been utilizing this as well as we've been moving forward in the decision-making process as far as our task forces are concerned. And might we update this policy? Might we bring this policy to the board in the near future? We may very well, if in fact it's something that our council and others are suggesting would be in the best interest of our organization. Which, when I say in the best interest of our organization, I'm talking about kids. I'm talking about in the best interest of our kids, because that's what it amounts to. So we will utilize this policy, and again, this is all about ensuring that we are keeping our kids safe. Student supports. We're going to continue to strengthen our multi-tiered system of supports, which we are now 3 years into. It's a wonderful model. We've had it happening in our organization already, so the foundation's there. Sherry and Emily and their team done a wonderful job of getting this implemented, working with Ed West and Matt Novel from the State Board of Education, who's a friend of the districts. We've done some wonderful work in this area. This fits neatly into that pyramid because it's about providing additional services as necessary. Again, as I mentioned, universal screen all students immediately. Teachers, counselors, psychologists, other specialists work as a team to build an integrated plan for targeted assistance. So again, these are just elements of MTSS, and of course, professional development. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the hive effect of getting a consortium of support providers so that we're the best for all of our kids. We can't do everything. We need everyone out there contributing. And there's a lot of organizations that are very committed to this work. Attendance. There may or may not be new guidelines for attendance. Everyone knows we've talked about a year in a year out about ADA and how schools are funded. But that's based on children coming to school. What if they don't come to school? What if they're doing distant learning? So we're waiting for all those guidelines, but we will, of course, follow whatever protocols are in place. Same thing with instructional time. We have to ensure that we are following all those laws. So as we are creating these models, we're still waiting to hear whether or not there might be any changes there as far as our ability to be able to safely deliver our educational program, but within the parameters of our school day, which is why it's so critical also that we continue to work with our associations and develop new attendance strategies, because it's a new normal. Our old strategies is different. So we got to develop new ones. We do have our student services group working very closely with our task force team that's focused on this. And then develop attendance improvement plans, because it's going to be, again, different than it was in the past. So how are we going to ensure, particularly our distance learners, are being accounted for? Okay. Childcare and after school programs. So clearly people need to go back to work. We've heard from many of our families, we need to get back to work. We want our children in school, not just because we need to go back to work, because we want our children in school and we want your children back in school. So how are we going to be able to safely provide our educational program and at the same time make sure that we're caring for our children? So we're looking closely at childcare, our after-school programs, both of whom are represented on our task force. So, of course, we have our after-school education and safety program through a state grant, but we realize a lot of families are looking for us to continue to provide childcare for their children, and we have every intention to figure out a way to do that. So we're working very closely with everyone on that. And this is another hive effect, because there's others who do this work. But here's the big question everyone wants the answer to. What's it going to look like? What might school look like when we return? So let's go through some of those possibilities. So first and foremost, design an instructional program within the constraints imposed by the pandemic. So clearly, it's not as we know school to have been up until this time. But we all recognize that. This almost goes without saying. So here's the considerations that every organization is looking at as they move forward. First of all, the range of environments, from the most restrictive, which would be what we've been in up until school ended for us on May 28th, which is full distance. No students are present. No one's present, period. Everything's remote. To limited restrictions, which is a combination of in-person and remote instruction, to the least restrictive environment, which is, of course, full in-person instruction, which there are districts that have come out and committed to that, but there's always a little disclaimer underneath that says, yeah, it's to the extent we're able to do that, given public health concerns. So again, and there's a lot of things in between those, not quite as limited or not quite as restrictive, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of those things might look like. The overarching design principle, I mentioned this earlier, and I'll mention it again, and I'll probably mention it about 1,000 more times over the course of the next few months as we're working on this. What we design, we're going to get. So if we are able to design a model that takes the safety precautions and all the considerations into consideration, and it's able to be practiced effectively, then I believe we will really be able to continue to deliver an instructional program where everyone will be happy about, while we continue to move through this very, very challenging and unprecedented time in our country and the world's history, for that matter. So again, what we design is going to speak to the challenges that we're trying to address. Specifically, those principles, again, close collaboration between the district leadership and our employee groups, because everything we do, we move forward with our team. Obviously, everyone needs to be comfortable, as I mentioned. Everybody needs to be pulling this cart in the same direction. When we talk about the organization, it's everyone. When we talk about moving forward, it's everyone. Use the most current guidance. Every aspect of the school day must be rethought. Also, I mentioned earlier, when kids are coming in the morning, we don't want everyone clustered in the morning, all coming at the same time. How do we stagger that in a way that we're able to take kids' temperatures, for example, to not have a large number of kids all congregating at the same time, all the kids out there in the playground before school starts, for example. Every single aspect of the school day we have to rethink. And then equity-based scheduling, taking into account the diverse learning models, languages, and the living situations of our students. Again, we know that there's situations where you have large families, for example, and sometimes there's a lot of responsibilities within families. We have children whose first language is not English, or who have other obstacles that make it even more of a challenge. How are we going to address those needs? Again, when we look at equity, we look at all children, because the exceptional learner has special needs as well. Children who are accelerated, children who are right now looking at that application to a university next year. Everyone's needs have to be met. So how do we do that? Well, we ask ourselves these questions, and our task force go about trying to answer them. How will we support students who have been disproportionately impacted by school closure? How will the needs of students who were most significantly impacted by shelter in place and those who may not be able to provide home support, tech access, or a quiet place to work be met? Regarding communications, how do we ensure we have provided information in various languages and through various channels to ensure information is shared to all with opportunities for feedback? Is it two directional? I will add that we are recording this, and when I send this out, it will be in both our primary languages as well, interpreted for all of our families. And everything's two directional in Alvord. I get emails constantly from all of our families and staff. When you go to our website, you have an opportunity to ask questions, and we're in the process of also creating a new FAQ based on all of these questions that'll be related to school reopening. Regarding assessment, how do we intentionally disaggregate data for all subgroups to uncover potential pockets of greater need? So again, we always talk about our app Promise Youth, but it's much more than that. We want to make sure that all of our children, particularly those that we feel may have been at a disadvantage over the course of the last few months. By the time we reopen school, it'll be 6 months. So how do we assess, and how do we drill down to the granular level to make sure that we are covering all of our children? Trauma-informed social emotional learning. How do we identify ways in which equity, social emotional learning, and academic development can reinforce each other rather than being pursued separately? So how are we able to integrate a lot of these concepts and ideas? The assumption also being on this that many more children will have issues coming in because of 6 months out of school. Building capacity. How do we plan and prepare staff to develop culturally responsive strategies as we toggle between emergency response to intentional distance and hybrid learning? In other words, we have to be prepared and build the capacity at a moment's notice to be ready should the conditions change and we have to move to a different model. For our English learners, how do we gain a greater understanding of culture and elevate home languages to honor our families and improve the parent and caregiver connection to school as students spend more time learning from home? So again, that's been one of the national stories, which is this inequity related to home learning. Our children with disabilities. How do we leverage technology and remote learning in ways that ensure equity is not equality? A lot of people confuse those terms. So we need to ensure that that is not the case. And that goes for all of our learners. For support programs, I've talked about the hive mentality. How do we create that? And we already have all kinds of relationships with the people. We created the equity and access position that Georgina Ramirez is going to begin July 1 under Dr. Kemp in the Ed Services Office. Student services, great relationships with our community. So we're going to continue to build this hive mentality so that we can leverage the many providers who are out there doing the same work. They have the same mindset we have. Back to the considerations, and I'm putting this on again only because we're now going to talk about what some of these options might look like as it relates to K-5. And I'm going to ask Dr. Kemp to ready herself to share this part of the presentation with me. So K-5 model, whether it's all students, half students, a third of students present on any given day. Obviously, we need to meet the instructional requirements. We need to cohort our students and our families, reduce class size to the greatest extent possible, assuming there's going to be remote learning on days students are not present, again, dependent upon the model. Childcare and after-school programs, and then all the specialty programs that we want to continue to support as well. Dr. Kemp, if you want to share the screen with me right now, you see draft up there. It is a draft, and it might be hard to see anyway because it's a little bit small. These are just examples, things that we're seeing in a lot of different places, a lot of different school districts. And amongst the possibilities as we continue to work with our employee groups to find the perfect model for Alvord. We don't want to pick up someone's model. We're going to create our own based on the great work that others are doing as well, but specific to our children, to our families, to our community. Dr. Kemp, if you want to talk a little bit about this model.
Sure. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I just would like to say that as we are developing our Alvord Unified School District models, we will be in collaboration with our unions and our teachers to make sure that it's the best fit for everyone. So what you see right here is our elementary online distance learning model. And this will look very different than what we had to do in the spring when we had to, shut down overnight. So one of the big differences that you will see in this model is that it's very highly structured. So the day is actually broken down by the hour, and the day is a mixture of live teaching with your teacher, of engaging learning activities, even creative brain breaks for our kiddos because we know that they need to move around in order to learn. There are also office hours available, and what that is it's an opportunity for students and their parents to log on with the teacher and ask individual questions and get one-on-one help. So that is a big change from what we had to do in the spring. And also we are making a commitment to provide support for our parents because we know that it's very difficult to do this at home. And so we are going to teach our parents along with our students. So we're definitely committed to doing that. Are we on the hybrid one now?
So so this is just the rest of the schedule. And again, I apologize for the fact that it may not be easy to see, but again, this will be available as soon as our board meeting ends tonight, and we'll go ahead and get this information out to everyone this weekend as well. Okay, so here's another example.
There you go. Perfect. Okay, and so the next one is the hybrid, and as you know, the importance of hybrid is that we're actually dividing our students in half, 50%, so that we have half the number of students on campus with us, therefore decreasing their interactions and better enabling social distancing and allow us to follow those safety precautions. So with the hybrid, the students are split into 2 cohorts, and they're 2 days on campus with their teacher and 3 days off. And so 2 days on campus with their teacher, 50% of the students in the classroom, they're receiving their regular instruction with their teacher, they're interacting with their peers, socially distancing, of course. And so they're getting all of that, regular feeling like a normal student. Then 2 days, the other 2 days, they have distance learning activities which will build upon what they've learned in the classroom. They will also have their virtual music program during these days, and probably will have their physical education during that time. One of the days is reserved, again, for office hours, and so there's a set period of time where students and their parents can log on with their teachers and get that one-on-one support, intervention, perhaps get English language learner support, special ed support, any type of supports we need. We're reserving a space for that.
Right. So again, as we move through the presentation, it again is with the particular environments that we may face. We don't know what it's going to be like in August, obviously. So when we talk about having a least restrictive environment, just full school as we knew it before COVID, or some degree of it, to the most restrictive, which is fully online. So we are planning, of course, to have the variety of models available depending on the conditions at that time. Once again, always ready and prepared in the event things change. We're not missing a beat. The secondary model, very similar, with instructional minutes, cohorting students, again, doing whatever we can to follow the guidelines that keep the spread of disease and keep children and staff safe. Same thing with the 9-12 model. So really, it could be a 6-12 model because we're looking at the secondary model in a very similar way. So Dr. Kemp, you want to talk a little bit about what that might look like?
Absolutely. So if we're looking at the online distance learning for secondary school, again, the big difference is going to be that it's highly structured. As you know, our secondary schools are periods 1 through 6. So we may have a day where you could have periods 1 through 6, or you can have a day where you have block scheduling, which gives more time to the teachers and students to interact. So what block scheduling would be for us would be one day you have periods 1 through 3, the next day you have periods 4 through 6 at your specific times. And so that really gives more opportunity for the teachers to do that live learning, and then to do their guided activities, to do independent practice. And so that would be 4 days a week. And then again, we would have one day set aside that we would have office hours at scheduled times per content level. So a student would actually have the opportunity to receive intervention and support in all of their subject areas if they need it, or they could just go to biology or math or whatever they need, right? So that support is there for them. If we move along to the hybrid model for secondary, again, you want to split the school into 2 cohorts, so you're cutting down on the number of students that are on campus. And then we also probably would want to look at block scheduling again for this, because then you are decreasing the number of interactions students are having. So again, you have 2 days a week on campus, 2 days a week off campus. So a student would have periods 1 through 3 one day, and then 4 through 6 the next day. And then you would have 2 days off campus where, again, you're doing your learning activities. And with secondary, you're going to have a lot more probably videos, and maybe the teacher will film themselves teaching, because, you have AP calculus, you have to continue on with that learning. So it will depend on what the rigor of the course is, but you will have that. And again, we will have that one day of office hours that is so important that the students can log on with their teacher and get that individualized support.
So
those are just models.
So on the block schedule, typically you see 6 periods worth of children every day, 180 children. So instead you'll see 90 every day. So obviously you see fewer students see fewer of each other. Therein is a very, very positive way of helping to keep children safe. However, it's not like it's just, okay, start teaching in block schedules like it's easy. It's a whole new different type of teaching and will require professional development. I know our teachers are able to do because we have an incredible teaching staff, but it's not easy. It's not like you don't do 2 days of lessons in one day. It's a different approach to instruction. There's things you could do in a block where you have an hour and a half, for example, that you couldn't do in 50 minutes. So it's a whole new paradigm shift, and we'll of course have to provide our staff with all the professional development they need to confidently deliver that program. When we broke for March 13th closure, our teachers were practically fending for themselves. We did a great job early on in getting Google training and providing a lot of internal support. But boy, they did put things together. That's what teachers do. They put things together, they get it done. Now we have time, obviously, to plan. Then we had 2 weeks. Now we have a couple months. So obviously we started this process. We're continuing this process. And once we get these pieces in place, once again, knowing that may look different August 10th, we may have every intention of plan A, but we're going to be using plan C. We got to be ready with plan C. Thank you, Dr. Kemp.
You're welcome.
Teaching and learning in a blended model. Once again, this is something that we are also providing, continually providing professional development. And this is one of the silver linings that you'll hear people who are talking about silver linings of everything that's happened. And I mean, it's nice to look at the glass half full, especially given all these challenges. And of course, one of the things everyone talks about is technology, that perhaps we will finally realize the promise of technology. So many teachers obviously have now added that to their repertoire. We're learning that, even younger children could learn that way. We just have to be very intentional about it. So the hope is that we're going to be able to continue to perfect this model so that our families could feel confident that, yes, it's a distant model. Yes, it's not ideal, but it's a crisis. That's the reality. It's a crisis. So how could we do what we need to do as best we can under those circumstances with the restrictions and still continue to move our children forward? So that's the challenge we face, and we'll continue to provide support. So we already have Odyssey Learning Program that we utilize. As we discussed, as Dr. Kemp just talked about, the hybrid instructional model, but also a homeschool model. There's homeschool models out there that people are talking about. So we've also begun investigating. Mr. Shiflett at the Alternative Education Center has already visited a very successful model, and we're looking at the possibility of how we might be able to have a model that would capture a different family. This would address another need of a family because it's just a different way to approach distant learning. Next steps. The task force recommendations will be brought to the board on July 9th, and we'll have a study session. So we certainly hope everyone will be able to join us for that. At that point, we'll determine, the school board will decide whether or not they want to do additional sessions. And at that time also determine a date so that families are ready and could prepare, because everyone's anxious and want to know. As a staff, we're planning for them all. So obviously we need to have all those pieces in place. So as far as moving forward with our employee groups and preparing professional development and all that, we're preparing for all of them. And I have every expectation that we might see all of them. Who knows? Anyone's guess is as good as mine. Nothing expert about this. It's a timeline we have no control over. But at that point, obviously families need to know and make plans. So that's why that childcare piece is so critical that I mentioned earlier. We're going to take care of your kids. It's just simple as that. Whatever the model is, we're going to take care of your kids. So families could rest assured that your children are going to be in a safe environment and that we're going to be able to care for them. Whatever part of schooling we're going to be able to deliver, we're going to safely deliver. And then, of course, the last step, continue to work with our labor partners, because obviously that's the people doing the work. We're up here talking about it. They're doing the work, and that's not lost on any of us here. So for questions, email the number 2, superintendent@alvordschools.org. Families, if you have not completed the survey yet, please do. There's surveys out for every group right now. Please complete those. Our parent survey, which is a family survey, we realize and expect that they're talking with their children, particularly younger children. We're closing in on 30% of our families, so we'd love to have an even larger sample. Might there be another survey in the next couple of weeks when things change? There may be. So I appreciate everyone staying tuned, following us on our weekly message that I send out. I will continue to send that out. Look for the FAQ related to reopening and continuity of learning. I'll announce that. Hopefully that'll be available as of this weekend, so we could start addressing some of the questions likely that are coming from this particular presentation. So with that, Madam President, that is my report.